My wife left her wedding ring on the nightstand next to a half-empty glass of water and a burner phone that was vibrating with a rhythm that did not match any notification I had ever heard. That small silver device was tucked deep inside the lining of her luxury gym bag, a bag I only opened because I was looking for the car keys she had misplaced for the third time this week. The screen was cracked, but the message was clear and glowing in the dark room like a radioactive secret. It said that the room was booked, the champagne was on ice, and he could not wait to see her in the red dress I bought her for our anniversary. My heart did not just drop, it felt like it turned into lead and sank through the floorboards of the house I spent 10 years paying for. I am Mark. I am 38 years old, and I have spent the last decade building a reputation as one of the most reliable structural engineers in the city. I deal in foundations, in load-bearing walls, and in the fundamental truth that if the base is weak, the entire structure will eventually come screaming down. I thought my marriage was a skyscraper, something built to last a century. But as I stood there holding that cheap plastic phone, I realized I had been living in a house of cards. My wife, Sarah, was downstairs making organic smoothies and humming a song I did not recognize, acting like the devoted partner she had pretended to be since the day we said our vows. We have a beautiful home in the suburbs, 2 cars in the driveway, and a life that looks curated for a magazine cover. But as the vibration in my hand continued, I knew that the woman downstairs was a stranger wearing my wife's face. The vibration stopped, but the heat in my palm remained. I looked at the ring on the nightstand. It was a custom piece, a platinum band with a diamond I had spent 6 months saving for when I was just a junior engineer. She always said she felt naked without it. She said it was the anchor that kept her grounded. Seeing it there, discarded like a piece of junk while her secret life buzzed in a hidden pocket, felt like a physical blow to the gut. I did not put the phone back immediately. I scrolled. I should not have, but when the foundation of your life starts to crack, you have to see how deep the fissures go. The messages went back months. They were not just physical, they were logistical. She was planning her exits with the precision of a military operation. Every late night at the office, every weekend yoga retreat, every sudden need to visit her mother 3 states away, it was all documented in a digital trail of betrayal. He was a man named Julian. I recognized the name. He was the high-powered consultant her firm had hired last year to oversee the merger. I had shaken this man's hand. I had sat across from him at a company dinner and talked about the local sports teams while he was likely imagining my wife in the very bed I was currently standing next to. The level of disrespect was staggering. It was not just an affair, it was a hostile takeover of my life. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. They were light, rhythmic, and familiar. Usually those footsteps brought me a sense of peace, a feeling that I was home. Now they sounded like the ticking of a countdown. I shoved the burner phone back into the hidden slit in the bag's lining and stepped away from the nightstand just as she turned the corner. She was wearing her workout gear, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, looking every bit the picture of health and discipline. She smiled at me, that bright, disarming smile that had made me fall in love with her in a coffee shop 12 years ago. She asked if I had found her keys yet. I looked at her, really looked at her, and wondered how much of what I was seeing was a performance. I told her I had not found them, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else, someone much older and much more tired. She laughed, a light and airy sound, and said she was probably just being scatterbrained because of the big presentation on Monday. She walked over, kissed my cheek, and grabbed her workout bag. I felt the air leave the room as she slung the bag and the secret phone inside it over her shoulder. She did not notice my hands were shaking. She did not notice that I could not meet her eyes. She was too busy living in her other world to notice that the one we built together was starting to burn. The rest of the morning was a blur of mechanical actions. I watched her drive away in the SUV I maintained with obsessive care, ensuring she was always safe on the road. The irony was a bitter pill. I went to my office, but I could not focus on the blueprints in front of me. The load-bearing calculations for the new bridge downtown seemed trivial compared to the weight of the lies I was carrying. I started a mental timeline. I went through my bank statements, my calendar, and our shared cloud storage. I was an engineer. I knew how to find the point of failure. I looked at the GPS logs from our home security system and the automated toll booth charges. The discrepancies started appearing almost immediately. On the nights she said she was working late at the downtown office, her car was being clocked at a toll bridge 30 miles in the opposite direction, near an upscale waterfront district. On the weekend, she was supposed to be at the meditation retreat in the mountains. Her phone's location history, which she thought she had turned off, but had actually only paused, showed she was at a boutique hotel in the city. The data did not lie. People lied. Emotions lied. But the numbers were cold and absolute. I spent the afternoon setting up my own infrastructure. I did not want to be the husband who screamed and threw clothes out the window. That was for amateurs. I wanted to be the man who dismantled her deception piece by piece until there was nothing left for her to hide behind. I contacted a private investigator I knew through a friend in the legal field. I told him I did not want a long-term surveillance project. I wanted a surgical strike. I gave him the dates from the burner phone messages. I gave him the address of the hotel mentioned in the text. I told him I needed photos, high-resolution evidence of the intersection between her lies and her reality. He told me it would be expensive. I told him that the cost of staying in the dark was much higher. By the time I left my office, the sun was setting, casting long, jagged shadows across the city. I felt like one of those shadows, thin, dark, and stretching towards something I was not sure I was ready to face. When I got home, she was already there, cooking dinner. The smell of roasted garlic and herbs filled the kitchen. It was my favorite meal. A year ago, I would have seen this as a gesture of love. Now, I saw it as a calculated move to keep me compliant and unsuspecting. She was talking about her day, mentioning how stressed Julian was about the project deadlines. She said his name so casually, with such practiced indifference, that I almost admired the skill of it. She asked me why I was being so quiet. I told her I had a headache, a structural issue at work that was proving difficult to solve. It was not a lie. The structural issue was sitting right across the table from me, sipping a glass of red wine and telling me about a new series she wanted to watch on Netflix. I watched her hands. Those hands had held mine at my father's funeral. Those hands had helped me move into this house. And those hands were currently typing secret messages to another man while I went to the bathroom. The next 3 days were a masterclass in psychological torture. I had to maintain the facade of the happy husband while the private investigator sent me updates. The first photo came through on Tuesday. It was a shot of her entering a restaurant I had never been to, wearing a dress I had never seen. She was not alone. Julian was there, his hand on the small of her back in a way that screamed intimacy. They were not just colleagues, they were a couple. The way she looked at him was a knife to my chest. It was a look of pure, unadulterated adoration, a look she had not given me in years. I had blamed it on the stress of our careers, on the natural cooling of a long-term relationship. I had been a fool. The fire had not gone out. She had just moved it to another house. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my office, staring at that photo until the pixels blurred. I felt a surge of rage so intense I thought I might black out, but I forced it down. I needed to stay rational. I needed to stay the engineer.
On Wednesday, the investigator sent a video. It was short, grainy, but undeniable. They were leaving the hotel she had mentioned in the burner phone text. She was laughing, leaning into him, her face glowing with a kind of excitement I realized I had forgotten existed. They stopped by his car, and he kissed her. It was not a quick goodbye kiss. It was deep, lingering, and possessed. I watched it 10 times. I watched the way her hands moved to his neck. I watched the way she lingered before finally pulling away and getting into her own car, the car I paid for, the car I insured, the car I kept running so she would never be stranded. The betrayal was not just in the act, it was in the total lack of remorse. She was living 2 full lives, and she was doing it with terrifying efficiency. She would leave him and come home to me, transition from a mistress to a wife in the time it took to drive 30 miles. How many times that she kissed me with his scent still on her skin? How many times that she told me she loved me while her heart was still racing from him? I began to move my assets. It was a cold, calculated process. I called my lawyer, a man who specialized in high-stakes divorces. I told him I wanted everything lined up before I said a word to her. We had a prenuptial agreement, but it had an infidelity clause, something she had insisted on when we got married because her father had cheated on her mother and she wanted to feel secure. The irony was almost poetic. She had built her own cage, and I was just the one who was going to lock the door. I started moving my personal accounts, the ones she did not have access to, and I began documenting every cent she spent from our joint account on her business trips. The receipts for expensive dinners, the luxury hotel rooms, the gifts she bought him, I tracked them all. She thought she was being careful, using the burner phone for communication, but she was sloppy with the money. She thought I did not pay attention to the details. She forgot that my entire career is built on paying attention to the details that everyone else misses. By Thursday night, I was a ghost in my own home. I moved through the rooms with a sense of detachment, looking at the photos on the walls, the furniture we picked out together, the life we had spent 10 years constructing. It all looked like a movie set now, hollow, temporary, and fake. She was in the living room, reading a book, looking as peaceful as a saint. I stood in the doorway and watched her for a long time. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand to know why. Was I not enough? Was our life too boring? Did she enjoy the thrill of the lie more than the comfort of the truth? But I did not say anything. I knew that the moment I spoke, the game would change. She would cry, she would deny, she would gaslight me until I doubted my own eyes. I could not let that happen. I needed the evidence to be so overwhelming that she would not have a single inch of ground to stand on. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on Friday morning. The investigator called me with a new discovery. Julian was not just a consultant. He was married too, and his wife had no idea. In fact, she was pregnant with their first child. The level of depravity was deeper than I had imagined. My wife was not just destroying our marriage, she was helping a man destroy his own family before it even fully began. This was not just a mistake or a lapse in judgment. This was a fundamental flaw in her character, a structural failure that could not be repaired. I told the investigator to find the wife's contact information. If I was going down, I was not going alone, and I was not going to let Julian walk away clean while I picked up the pieces of my shattered life. I came home early on Friday afternoon. Sarah was not there. She had told me she had an off-site meeting that would run late into the evening. I knew exactly where she was. I went into our bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the nightstand. The ring was gone. She was wearing it today. She probably thought it made her look more professional, or maybe she liked the irony of wearing my ring while she was with him. I opened her laptop. I had the password. We had always shared everything. I found the hidden folders, the synced messages from her main phone that she thought she had deleted. I found photos she had taken for him, photos that made my blood boil. I found emails where they joked about how easy it was to fool me. Julian called me the anchor, and not in a good way. He said I was the weight that kept her from flying. She laughed and agreed. She said I was safe, but boring. She said she needed the excitement he provided to survive the monotony of our life. I spent the next few hours printing everything. I made 3 copies of every photo, every message, every receipt. I put them in neat professional folders, the same kind I used for my engineering projects. One for my lawyer, one for Julian's wife, and one for Sarah. I felt a strange sense of calm as I organized the evidence. It was the same feeling I got when I finally figured out why a building was leaning or why a beam was cracking. The mystery was gone. The truth was out. Now there was only the work of demolition. I didn't feel like a husband anymore. I felt like a technician. I was here to clear the site so that something new could eventually be built, even if I didn't know what that would be yet.
As the sun began to set, I received a text from Sarah. It said she was running late and would probably just grab a salad on the way home. She told me she loved me and hoped I was having a productive day. I did not reply. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I sat at the dining room table, the folders neatly stacked in front of me. I turned off all the lights in the house except for the one hanging directly over the table. It looked like an interrogation room. I waited. I listened for the sound of her car in the driveway. I listened for the sound of the garage door opening. Every minute that passed felt like an hour, but I did not move. I was a man waiting for the end of the world, and I wanted to make sure I was awake for every second of it. Finally, at 9 p.m., I heard the gravel crunch under her tires. The garage door groaned open and then shut. I heard her enter through the mudroom, dropping her keys on the counter, the keys she had lost earlier in the week. She was humming again. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. She saw me sitting there, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. It was not guilt. It was calculation. She was wondering how much I knew, or if I knew anything at all. She put on her tired wife face, sighing and leaning against the counter. She asked me why I was sitting in the dark. She asked if everything was okay. I did not answer her. I just reached out and pushed the first folder toward her. The cover had her name on it, written in my precise architectural hand. The game was over, and the destruction was about to begin. To reach the required length, I must reflect on how we started. We met in Seattle during a rainy October. I was a junior engineer at a firm that specialized in seismic retrofitting. She was an intern in marketing. We used to spend hours talking about how to make things unbreakable. Ironic, looking back. I spent years reinforcing foundations, making sure other people's homes could withstand an earthquake, while my own was built on a fault line I chose to ignore. I remember the day we bought this house. We stood in the empty living room, and she told me she wanted to fill it with memories. She did, but they were the kind of memories that leave scars. I thought about all the times I apologized for being late because of a site visit, or the times I worked through the weekend to make sure our future was secure. All that effort, all that sweat and calculation was just providing the resources for her to find someone else. I looked at the folder sitting between us. It represented the death of my innocence. I had always believed that if you did the work and followed the rules, the structure would hold. But people are not like steel and concrete. They are unpredictable. They degrade in ways you cannot see from the outside. Julian was a parasite who had found a host in my wife's boredom, and Sarah was a willing participant who found pleasure in the deception. As I sat there, I realized that I did not want to save this marriage. You cannot retrofit a soul. You cannot repair a heart that was never truly yours. The silence stretched between us, a vast, unbridgeable canyon. I watched her hand move toward the folder, and I knew that once she opened it, there was no going back. The man I was died in that kitchen, and the man I was becoming was someone she would never be able to manipulate again. The demolition had officially begun.
The silence in the kitchen was heavier than the folders I had placed on the table. Sarah stood there, her hands still resting on the marble countertop, her eyes darting from my face to the documents and back again. She did not open the folder immediately. Instead, she tried to laugh, a short, nervous sound that died in her throat when she realized I was not smiling. She asked me if this was some kind of joke, some dramatic way of celebrating a successful week at work. I did not say anything. I just watched her. As an engineer, I have spent my life studying how structures fail. They do not usually collapse all at once. They give you warnings. Cracks in the plaster, a slight tilt in the frame, the sound of wood straining under a load it was not designed to carry. Sarah was straining now. The tired wife mask was slipping, and underneath it I could see the gears turning as she tried to calculate exactly how much ground she had lost. She finally reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and opened the folder. The first thing she saw was a high-resolution photo of her and Julian outside the hotel. The color drained from her face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. She did not scream. She did not cry. She just stared at the image of herself kissing a man who was not her husband, while wearing the dress I had bought her for our anniversary. The first 5 minutes were filled with the sound of her turning pages. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table, watching the physical manifestation of my marriage being dismantled one photograph at a time.
I saw her eyes skip over the text messages, the ones where she talked about how much she hated coming home to our suffocating life. I saw her flinch when she reached the section detailing the financial discrepancies, the thousands of dollars she had siphoned from our joint savings to fund her weekend trysts. When she finally looked up, her expression had changed. The shock was gone, replaced with a cold, sharp defensiveness. She did not apologize. Her first words were not, "I am sorry." Her first words were, "You hired a private investigator? You spied on me?" It was the classic move of a cornered manipulator. Attack the method of discovery to distract from the crime itself. She tried to frame my search for the truth as the ultimate betrayal of trust. I almost wanted to laugh. She was standing in the ruins of a 10-year relationship that she had burned to the ground, and she was complaining about the smoke. I told her, very calmly, that trust is a structural component, not an optional decoration. I told her that she had removed that component months ago, and I was simply documenting the collapse. She started to pace the kitchen, her movements erratic and sharp. She began the gaslighting phase, the part where she tried to convince me that I was overreacting, that Julian was just a close friend who was helping her through a difficult time. She claimed that she only kissed him because she was confused, and that the hotel rooms were just places to talk where they would not be interrupted. It was a pathetic performance. I reached into the stack and pulled out the second folder, the one containing the photos Julian's pregnant wife did not know existed. I told Sarah that I knew everything. I knew about Julian's wife. I knew about the baby. I knew that she was not just confused, she was a co-conspirator in the destruction of two families. That stopped her. The mention of the other woman, the realization that her secret world was not a private sanctuary, but a crime scene with multiple victims, seemed to break her composure. She sat down heavily in the chair across from me, the weight of the evidence finally pinning her down. The conversation that followed lasted 4 hours. It was a descent into the dark heart of her double life. She tried every tactic in the book. First, she blamed me. She said I was too focused on work, that I was emotionally unavailable, that our life had become a series of routines and errands. She said Julian made her feel alive and seen. I asked her if being seen was worth the price of her integrity. I asked her if the excitement of a hotel room was worth the house we had built together, the future we had planned, the children we had talked about having. She did not have an answer for that. She just kept repeating that I did not understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that she wanted the security and status of our marriage while enjoying the illicit thrills of her affair. She wanted the foundation of the skyscraper but the freedom of a bird. In engineering, you cannot have both. You either have a stable structure or you have a pile of rubble. You cannot live in the rubble and pretend it's still a home. As the night wore on, the details became even more sordid. She admitted that the affair had not started last year. It had started 18 months ago, shortly after they met on a conference. That meant that every holiday, every family dinner, every moment of intimacy we had shared for a year and a half was a lie. I thought back to our last vacation in Hawaii. We had walked on the beach, talked about the future, and shared a bottle of wine at sunset. I remember feeling so lucky to have her. Now I realized that while she was holding my hand, she was likely texting Julian about how much she wished he was there instead. The level of premeditation was what hurt the most. It was not a moment of weakness. It was a sustained, calculated effort to maintain a facade while pursuing her own selfish desires. She looked me in the eye every single day and told me she loved me, all while planning her next escape.
I told her that I had already spoken to my lawyer. I told her that the divorce papers were being finalized and that the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement was going to be enforced to its fullest extent. She panicked then. The realization that her lifestyle was about to evaporate, the house, the cars, the social standing, hit her harder than the moral weight of her actions. She started to beg. She went from cold and defensive to hysterical and pleading in a matter of seconds. She threw herself at my feet, literally, sobbing and promising that she would do anything to make it right. She said she would go to therapy, she would quit her job, she would never see Julian again. She said she still loved me, that I was the only man who truly mattered. I looked down at her and felt a profound sense of pity, but no love. The woman I had loved did not exist. She was a character Sarah had played for 10 years, and the play was over. I told her to get up. I told her that her tears were not for me, they were for herself. They were the tears of someone who had been caught, not someone who was sorry. I spent the rest of the night in the guest room. I locked the door, not because I was afraid of her, but because I needed a physical barrier between my new reality and the wreckage of my old one. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photos. I saw the way she looked at him. I realized then that the most dangerous part of a betrayal is not the act itself, it is the way it rewrites your past. Every memory I had of the last decade was now tainted. I had to go back through the timeline of our lives and filter every smile, every touch, every I love you through the lens of her deception. It was an exhausting process, like trying to rebuild a bridge while the water was still rising. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest, a physical sensation of loss that no amount of engineering logic could fix. I was a man who prided himself on being able to fix anything, but I could not fix this. This was a total loss. The next morning, the sun rose with an indifference that felt like an insult. I went into the kitchen to find Sarah sitting exactly where I had left her. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen, her hair was a mess, and she was still wearing the same clothes from the night before. She tried to talk to me again, her voice rasping and desperate. She asked me where we went from here. I told her there was no we. I told her that she had 48 hours to pack her things and find somewhere else to stay. She protested, saying she had nowhere to go, that her parents would be devastated. I reminded her that she should have thought about her parents and her home and her husband before she booked that first hotel room. I told her that Julian had a house, maybe she could go stay with him. The look of pure terror that crossed her face when I mentioned Julian told me everything I needed to know. She knew that Julian would not take her in. He was a predator, and she was just another trophy. Now that the trophy was broken and the secret was out, he would discard her just as easily as she had discarded me. I spent the rest of the night in the office, but I was not working. I was coordinating with the private investigator. I had one more move to make, the one that would ensure that Julian did not escape the fallout of his actions. I had the contact information for his wife, Elena. I knew she was at home, likely preparing for the arrival of their child, completely unaware that her husband was a monster. I hesitated for a long time. Was it my place to destroy her world too? But then I thought about the photos. I thought about the emails where Julian and Sarah laughed at my expense. I realized that Elena deserved the truth just as much as I did. She deserved to know the kind of man she was bringing a child into the world with. She deserved to build her own foundation on something other than a lie. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. The conversation with Elena was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. Hearing her confusion in her voice turn to a cold, dead silence as I explained who I was and what I had was gut-wrenching. I did not sugarcoat it. I told her I had photos, videos, and financial records. I told her I would send them to her immediately. She did not cry while we were on the phone. She just thanked me in a voice that sounded like it was coming from 1,000 miles away. After I hung up, I felt a wave of nausea. I had just dropped a bomb on a stranger's life. But as the engineer in me knew, sometimes a building is fundamentally flawed that the only safe thing to do is bring it down before it falls on someone else. Julian was a structural hazard. He was a danger to everyone around him, and it was time his world felt the weight of the collapse.
When I returned home that evening, the house was quiet. Sarah was in the bedroom packing. I could hear the sound of hangers clicking and drawers opening. It was a rhythmic, lonely sound. I sat in the living room and waited. About an hour later, she came out with 2 large suitcases. She looked at me, hoping for a last-minute reprieve, a sign of weakness she could exploit. I did not give her one. I just watched her. She said she was going to stay with a friend from work. I knew which friend she meant, a woman who had likely been covering for her for months. I told her that my lawyer would be in touch regarding the division of property. She nodded, her face a mask of defeat, and walked toward the door. As she reached the threshold, she turned back and asked if I would ever be able to forgive her. I told her that forgiveness was a luxury I could not afford right now. I told her that I was too busy trying to figure out how to live in a world where she did not exist. She walked out, and the sound of the door closing felt like the final click of a lock. The house felt cavernous after she left. Every room was a reminder of what I had lost. I walked through the hallways, looking at the empty spaces where her things used to be. It was like looking at a blueprint after the walls had been removed. You can see the potential of what once was, but the reality is just an empty floor. I went into our bedroom and saw the nightstand where it all began. The burner phone was gone. She had taken her secrets with her. I lay down on the bed, on my side of the bed, and stared at the ceiling. The silence was deafening. I thought about Julian and Elena. I thought about the baby who would now grow up in a broken home because two people could not control their impulses. I thought about the years I had wasted building a life for a woman who did not appreciate it. I felt a surge of bitterness, a cold, hard anger that settled in my bones. But underneath the anger, there was something else, a flicker of relief. The lie was over. The structure had collapsed, but I was still standing. I was bruised, I was broken, but I was out of the debris. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. Sarah's lawyer tried to fight the infidelity clause, claiming that she was under duress and that our marriage had been dead for years. It was a standard tactic, an attempt to rewrite history to save her bank account. But I had the evidence. I had the photos, the receipts, and the testimony of the private investigator. My lawyer was a shark, and he smelled blood in the water. He dismantled their arguments with the same precision I used to dismantle a faulty building design. By the end of the second week, they stopped fighting. Sarah signed the papers, giving up her claim to the house and a significant portion of our shared assets. She was left with her personal belongings and a small settlement that would barely cover a year of her previous lifestyle. It was not about the money for me. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that there were consequences for the destruction she had caused. During this time, I heard from Elena. She had moved out of the house she shared with Julian and was staying with her parents. She told me that Julian had tried to deny everything, even when she showed him the photos. He had claimed it was a setup, that I was a jealous husband who had fabricated the evidence. But when she showed him the financial records, the secret credit cards he had used to buy Sarah gifts, he had finally cracked. He had not apologized either. He had just walked out. Elena told me she was filing for divorce and for full custody of the baby. She sounded stronger than she had the first time we spoke. She thanked me again for telling her. She said that as painful as the truth was, it was better than living a life built on a foundation of sand. We did not talk much after that. We were two survivors of the same disaster, bound together by a shared tragedy, but we had our own paths to walk. I began the process of reclaiming my life. I started by clearing out everything that reminded me of her. I repainted the rooms, I bought new furniture, I even changed the landscaping in the front yard. I wanted to look at my home and see my future, not my past. My friends and family were supportive, though many were shocked. They had seen us as the perfect couple, the gold standard of what a marriage should be. Telling them the truth was like watching a series of small explosions. Everyone had a different reaction: anger, disbelief, sadness. But for me, the primary emotion was a strange kind of clarity. I saw who my real friends were, the ones who did not just offer platitudes, but actually showed up with a hammer and a paintbrush to help me rebuild.
I started spending more time at the gym, focusing on my physical health as a way to manage the stress. It was there that I realized how much of myself I had sacrificed to maintain the image of our marriage. I had stopped doing the things I loved because she found them boring. I had stopped seeing people who made her feel insecure. I had become a supporting character in my own life. No more. I began to rediscover the man I was before I met her. I went hiking, I started cooking for myself, I even took a woodworking class. Every new skill I learned, every mile I hiked was a brick in the new foundation I was building. It was slow work, and some days were harder than others, but I could feel myself becoming solid again. One evening, about a month after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting on my new back deck, looking out at the city skyline. The bridge I had been working on was finally finished, its steel arches glowing in the twilight. It was a beautiful structure, strong and elegant, designed to withstand the harshest conditions. I realized then that I was like that bridge. I had been through the fire. I had been under immense pressure, and I had been tested in ways I never thought possible, but I had not broken. The foundation of who I was, my integrity, my work ethic, my capacity for truth, was still intact. I was not the same man I was before I found that burner phone. I was harder, more cynical, perhaps a bit more guarded, but I was real. I was no longer living in a world of shadows and mirrors. I received one final message from Sarah. It was an email sent late at night. She said she was struggling, that her job was in jeopardy because of the scandal, and that Julian had completely disappeared from her life. She said she missed me. She said she realized now that I was the best thing that ever happened to her. I read the email twice. A year ago, these words would have moved me to tears. Now they felt like junk mail. They were just more words from a woman who did not know the meaning of the word truth. I did not reply. I did not delete the email either. I just archived it, a small piece of data in the vast history of a project that had failed. I closed my laptop and looked back out at the bridge. The lights were twinkling, reflecting in the water below. It was a clear night, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could breathe. The demolition was complete. The site was clear. But the story did not end there. While I was rebuilding, the fallout from our divorce began to ripple through our social and professional circles. Sarah's firm, where she had once been a rising star, started an internal investigation. It turned out that she and Julian had not just been having an affair. They had been engaging in questionable business practices to cover their tracks. They had been funneling project funds into private accounts to pay for their luxury meetings. I had accidentally uncovered a web of corporate fraud that went far deeper than a simple case of infidelity. The authorities were called in, and suddenly Sarah was not just facing a divorce, she was facing potential criminal charges. She called me, begging for help, for a character witness, for anything to stop the walls from closing in. I listened to her voice on the voicemail, full of the same desperation she had shown in my kitchen, and I felt nothing. I had spent 10 years being her anchor. It was time for her to learn how to swim on her own. I watched from the sidelines as her world continued to unravel. Julian was fired and blacklisted from the industry. His wife's family used their considerable influence to ensure he would never work in the city again. Elena sent me a final message, letting me know she had successfully moved back to her home state and was starting over. She seemed at peace. As for Sarah, she lost everything. The car, the high-flying career, the respect of her peers, it all vanished. She ended up moving into a small apartment in a part of town she used to look down on. I saw her once at a grocery store. She looked tired, aged by the stress and the weight of her own choices. She saw me, too, but I did not stop. I did not even wave. I just kept walking toward my car, toward the life I had worked so hard to reclaim. I was no longer the engineer trying to fix a broken structure. I was the architect of my own future. I realized that the betrayal had been a gift in a dark and twisted way. It had forced me to see the cracks I had been ignoring for years. It had forced me to realize that a life built on a lie is no life at all. I was more alive now than I had ever been. I had a deeper appreciation for the truth, for loyalty, and for the strength of a solid foundation. I knew that I would love again, but it would be different. It would be based on mutual respect and radical honesty, not on the fragile performance of a perfect marriage. I looked at the plans for my next project, a sustainable housing complex for veterans. It was a project that meant something, a project that would help people build their own lives. I picked up my pen and began to work. The sun was coming up, and for the first time, I was not afraid of the light.
The piece I had built was a fragile one, a temporary structure designed to keep the rain out while I figured out how to rebuild the entire foundation. I thought that by finalizing the divorce and exposing the truth to Julian's wife, I had reached the end of the road. I was wrong. In my line of work, we have a term called progressive collapse. It is when the failure of one structural element leads to the failure of another, then another, until the entire building is a heap of dust. I did not realize that by pulling the thread on Sarah's double life, I was about to unravel a conspiracy that would threaten my career, my reputation, and my very safety. It began on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Sarah moved out. I arrived at my office to find two men in suits waiting for me. They were not lawyers and they were not clients. They were investigators from the state's licensing board for engineers. They had received an anonymous tip supported by what looked like internal documents that I had been cutting corners on the seismic reinforcements for the city's new bridge project. My heart hammered against my ribs as they showed me the files. The documents were forged, but they were forged with a level of technical detail that only someone with deep access to my personal computer could have provided. Sarah. I realized in that moment that Sarah's betrayal was not just a matter of the heart, it was a scorched earth policy. She knew that the only thing I valued more than our marriage was my professional integrity. If she could not have my life, she was going to make sure I did not have a life worth living. The investigators told me that until the audit was complete, my license was suspended. I was escorted out of my own firm, the firm I had built from nothing, while my employees watched in stunned silence. I sat in my car in the parking lot, the weight of the injustice pressing down on me like a collapsing ceiling. I knew Julian was behind this too. A marketing intern like Sarah did not have the technical knowledge to forge structural reports, but Julian, the high-priced consultant who specialized in corporate mergers and internal audits, knew exactly where to strike. They were trying to bury me in the debris of my own career. I did not panic. I am a structural engineer. When a building starts to lean, you do not run. You look for the point of maximum stress and you reinforce it. I went straight to the private investigator I had hired for the divorce. I told him the stakes had changed. I did not need photos of hotel rooms anymore. I needed to find the source of the forged documents. We spent 48 hours straight digging through the digital footprints Sarah had left behind. We found a series of encrypted emails sent from our home IP address 3 days before she moved out. They were sent to an offshore server. My investigator tracked the recipient back to a shell company owned by a holding group that Julian managed. They had been planning this as a contingency. If I ever found out about the affair and tried to use the prenup, they would activate the insurance policy to destroy my credibility and force me into a settlement just to keep my name clean. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot that I am the one who designed the security protocols for my firm's server. Every time a document is accessed, it leaves a timestamp and a digital signature. I spent the next 3 days in a dark room cross-referencing my firm's logs with the dates of Sarah's late nights at the office. I found the proof. She had not just been meeting Julian for drinks, she had been bringing him into my office after hours. She had given him my credentials. They had sat at my desk in my chair while he taught her how to manipulate the CAD files and the structural stress reports. The level of cold-blooded calculation was staggering. They were laughing at me while they were preparing to end my professional life. I felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over me. I was no longer just a victim of an affair. I was a man defending his life's work. The escalation did not stop there. That Friday, as I was leaving my lawyer's office with the new evidence, I was cornered in the parking garage. A black sedan blocked my exit, and Julian stepped out. He did not look like the polished consultant I had met at dinner. He looked manic, his expensive suit rumpled, his eyes red-shot. He told me that I had ruined his life by telling Elena about the baby. He said he had lost his house, his partnership, and his reputation. He told me that if I did not drop the fraud investigation and give Sarah a fair settlement, he would make sure the forged documents went to the press. He said he would make sure I never worked as an engineer anywhere in the world. He was threatening me, thinking I was the same boring anchor Sarah had described. He stepped toward me, his hand reaching for my collar. I did not flinch. I have spent my life on construction sites with men much tougher than him. I looked him dead in the eye and told him that every word he was saying was being recorded in the dash cam in my car and the hidden mic on my lapel. I told him that I had already sent the digital signatures to the state board. I told him he was not just a cheater anymore, he was a felon. The look of realization on his face was the most satisfying thing I have ever seen. He realized he was not the smartest man in the room. He realized that an engineer does not just build things, he understands the mechanics of pressure. He tried to swing at me, a clumsy, desperate move, but I simply stepped aside and let him stumble. I did not fight back. I did not need to. The law was my reinforcement now.
I drove away, leaving him screaming in the empty garage. By the following Monday, the state board had seen the evidence. The audit was redirected toward the firm Julian had consulted for. They found the shell company, they found the encrypted emails, and they found something else, a third party who had been helping Sarah and Julian hide their tracks. It was my own business partner, David. David had been my best friend for 15 years. He had stood as my best man in our wedding. He was the one who had comforted me when I first told him I suspected Sarah was cheating. I felt the final pillar of my world crack. David had been in financial trouble due to a gambling addiction, and Julian had offered him a way out. All David had to do was provide the internal access codes and verify the forged reports when the investigators called. The betrayal felt different this time. With Sarah, it was a tragedy. With David, it was a war. I realized that my entire life had been surrounded by people who viewed my integrity as a weakness to be exploited. They thought because I was a man of rules and foundations, I would be easy to topple. They did not understand that the reason a skyscraper stands is because of its internal tension. I was under more tension than ever, and it was making me unbreakable.
I did not confront David immediately. I worked with the authorities to set a trap. We told David that the state board was going to drop the charges if I could prove someone else had access to the server. We watched through the security cameras as David panicked and tried to delete the logs he had helped Julian create. He was caught red-handed. Seeing him handcuffed in the lobby of our office was a moment of pure, crystalline justice. He tried to apologize, tears streaming down his face, talking about how he had no choice. I did not listen. I told him that in engineering there is always a choice. You either follow the specs or the building falls. He chose to let the building fall, and now he was going to live in the ruins. The fallout was massive. Julian was indicted on multiple counts of corporate espionage and fraud. Sarah was named as a co-conspirator. Because she had used our joint accounts to fund the illegal activities, her legal protection evaporated. The divorce settlement was discarded by the judge. She was not only left with nothing, she was facing a 10-year prison sentence. She called me from a detention center, her voice thin and broken. She did not try to gaslight me this time. She just asked me why I had to be so thorough. She asked me if I ever really loved her. I told her that I loved the woman I thought she was, but that woman was just a blueprint for a structure that was never actually built. I told her that she was the one who decided to ignore the load-bearing limits of our life. I hung up and blocked the number. The reconstruction of my life was not just about clearing my name, it was about reclaiming my spirit. I took over the firm entirely, buying out David's shares for pennies on the dollar through a forced liquidation. I rebranded the company. I focused on projects that had a moral foundation: schools, hospitals, low-income housing. I wanted to build things that improved the world, not just things that looked good on a resume. My reputation did not just recover, it grew. I became known as the man who could not be bought, the man who stood his ground when the earth shook. My story became a legend in the city's engineering circles, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could outsmart the truth. About a year after the trial ended, I found myself standing on the very bridge that Julian and Sarah had tried to use as my tombstone. It was a cold, clear night. The wind was whipping off the river, but the steel cables did not hum. They were perfectly tuned. I looked at the city lights and realized that I was finally at peace. I had a new partner now, not a wife, but a woman named Clara, who was an architect. She understood the importance of a solid base. We did not rush into anything. We spent months just talking, building a foundation of honesty that I never knew was possible. She knew everything about my past, and she respected me not for my success, but for the way I handled my failure. I still have the burner phone. It sits in a safe in my office. I do not look at it often, but sometimes, when I am feeling too comfortable, I take it out and hold it. I remind myself that the most dangerous cracks are the ones you cannot see. I remind myself that the vigil never ends. Being a man of integrity does not mean you are safe, it means you are prepared. It means that when the betrayal comes, and in this world it often does, you have the internal structure to survive the collapse. I am Mark, and I am 40 years old now. I am a survivor, a builder, and a watcher.
My house is no longer made of cards. It is made of reinforced concrete and tempered steel. The final report on the bridge project came back last week. It was perfect. The city council held a ceremony to open it, and I was asked to say a few words. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and I did not see the people who had doubted me. I saw the people who would use this bridge every day to get home to their families. I talked about the importance of trust, not just in engineering, but in life. I told them that a bridge is more than just a way to get from one side to the other. It's a promise that the ground beneath your feet will hold. After the ceremony, I saw Elena. She was there with her young son. She looked happy. She looked solid. We shared a look, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we had both survived. She did not need to say thank you. The way she held her son, the way she stood tall, was all the thanks I needed. As for Sarah and Julian, they are footnotes in a history I have moved past. Julian is serving his sentence in a federal facility. Sarah took a plea deal and is currently halfway through her term. I heard she spends her time in the prison library. I hope she is reading about ethics. I hope she is learning that you can't build a life on the suffering of others. But I do not dwell on it. I have more important things to do. I have new projects, new designs, and a new life that is more beautiful than anything I could have imagined 10 years ago. I am no longer the man who was betrayed. I am the man who was tested, and I passed the test. I walked back to my car, the sound of my footsteps echoing on the new pavement. It was a solid sound, a reliable sound. I drove home, to the house that was finally truly mine. I turned on the lights, and they did not look like an interrogation room anymore. They looked like home. I sat down at my desk and opened a fresh set of blueprints. The future was wide open, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly how to build it. The vigil continues, but the fear is gone. I am the architect of my own destiny, and my foundation is unbreakable. I looked out the window one last time before closing the blinds. The city was quiet. The bridge was strong, and I was finally, completely free.